everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to Unloaded and Uncovered podcast with me, your host, Magda Desir. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like, share any videos that have resonated with you, comment, hit the notification bell to stay updated with new uploads, which come out every Friday at 12 a.m. Central Time. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Unloaded and Uncovered Podcast, and don't forget to follow and like us on Facebook at Unloaded and Uncovered. Now that we've gotten all that out of the way, hi, Janea. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for coming. I appreciate you. So how's it going? You're in Seattle, correct?
Things are gradually improving. I mean, I lost my job last summer and I've been looking for work, and I've got some freelance gigs that are keeping body and soul together, which is great. But it was a little challenging there at first, but I'm feeling more sort of open and positive because now I've learned that I actually can make some sort of a living doing freelance work. If that's what I got to do, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, you sound like me. I had the same situation happen to me. It will be a year next month. So I totally get it. Who's your friend? Is that your cat?
Oh yeah, this is Belladonna.
Hi, Belladonna. Belladonna's like, I want to get in it too. Hey, but yeah, it is kind of rough. The market is rough. What were you doing before?
I was doing digital marketing, and the funny thing about that is that one of the things I realized toward the end of, I was working for this company for almost 7 years. Toward the end of that time, I was like, I really hate marketing. Why am I working in this field?
I'm not gonna lie, I had the same thought too when I was doing as well digital marketing, but I was in paid social. So and I was at a fintech company. So while I was doing it, I was like, before I loved it, things like that. I had clients on the side, did freelance and did projects, taught high school students a program for like 6 weeks. I loved it. And then when I got to the fintech portion of it, doing it, I'm like, I don't like it anymore. I don't like it anymore. So I totally get it.
Yeah, I'm more of a writer and a storyteller than I am sort of an obsessive data collector. And I mean, there's a lot of data you need to gather when you're doing marketing, especially for a bigger client. And not only do you have to pull the numbers, but you have to then sort of tell them what it means, because, the director of marketing for this division at that Fortune 500 company is probably not keeping up with what this all means and its implications.
No, they're not. They're not. You kind of got to spoon feed the information to them. So, which makes it 10 times more, it makes it annoying. And it's the same process. You have to, as you said, you have to come up with why the numbers look that way, and then how we're going to manipulate the numbers to make it look good or to get the goals or KPIs that you want to reach as well. So I get that. I totally get it. It is draining. It's very draining. You really have to be a strong head data analyst to want to do this type of job. You really have to love data.
Yeah. And I was always kind of I grew up, I was kind of funneled into the gifted student classes because I had zero social skills, but I was brilliant. But one of the things I realized that even back then was that although I like math and I'm good at it, that doesn't mean that I want to do it. And the same thing with computer programming. It's it's really cool that it works, but when I try to do coding, it's where's that GD extra comma that's making this program not run? And so I have a lot more patience with animals and writing than I do with things that really should be simpler than they are, I guess.
Yeah, I get it. Because I went to school for accounting, and then I took my first accounting class, and I was like, yeah, this is not it. So I'm much more, as you said, you're much more comfortable with animals and writing and storytelling. I'm much more comfortable with sitting in front of a camera now and talking to people and doing this. So I guess we are on our respective paths and destinies to do what we want to do, truly. But since you had mentioned about storytelling, so let's get into Janea's story. I almost slipped up right there. But let's get into Janea's story. So Janea, tell us a little bit how you grew up in your background.
Well, I was born in Maine. My parents moved to Maine from New York City in 1967, and then I was born a year later, and my brother was born a couple of years after that. But they left New York City because they were like, things were starting to get a little crazy, and they wanted to raise their kids in a more rural areas. So here I was growing up in rural Maine, and I have so many great memories of like playing in the woods and like helping my mother with the garden, and just like being able to go out for a walk and nobody freaking out because you're just in the forest behind your house and you're fine. And so, I mean, I learned how to love animals from my mother, actually, when I was a little kid.
Well, that's interesting. So what was one of the fondest memories of your childhood?
I remember, like, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, one of our friends came over and he had this new game called Dungeons and Dragons. And so, I mean, it was a little complex for like 10 and 11-year-old kids to figure out the actual rules. But what I got was there's this fantasy world in which people chase dragons and rescue people in need. And, and so, after that, like, pretty regularly, my brother and I would go play in the woods and pretend that we were like Dungeons and Dragons characters rescuing maidens from, monsters or something like that. But that was one of my favorite times, is just being able to play creatively. I mean, like, we carried sticks, not swords. So it was a whole lot of making believe, and it was outdoors and it was fun. And I just really I felt sort of in my element when I could be in that, in that situation where my brother and I were doing this playing. And, I've been a Dungeons and Dragons nerd ever since. So I guess it worked.
It kind of reminds me, it sounds like, I know I'm not at that age to remember Dungeons and Dragons, but I've heard it growing up. But it kind of sounds like, to me, it's a mixture of like Harry Potter mixed with Stranger Things on Netflix. This is what I'm getting.
Yeah, it's a little. I mean, and as I've played it, it's a little less Harry Potter and a little more Stranger Things. And,
Got it.
Combine that with good old swords and sorcery fantasy novel. And so yeah, it's kind of it's not like a bunch of teenage kids in a wizarding school kind of thing. It's like more of a going out and traveling and adventuring.
So what is it that you do now?
Well, right now I am a writer. I'm working on a memoir, and I have a fantasy novel slowly coalescing in the back of my brain while I'm finishing up the memoir. And for work, I'm doing basically freelance web and social stuff. So I'm doing social media planning for an author whose book is coming out soon. And I'm doing technical support for another client who needs to figure out how to clean out their email list and get it organized. And I'm doing some video editing too, which is really fun. I've always had this thing for videos, like.
Okay. So tell us about the memoir. I know it's called Still Alive, Still Living, correct?
Still alive, still smiling.
Still smiling. Okay. So
yeah.
what was the whole concept for this memoir? Like, how did it start?
Well,
where did it start from?
Well, it basically started as I was like, I just really wanted to sort of tell my truth, because one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with is kind of being a people pleaser and not being super upfront about when I think something is not helpful. And so this is kind of but it's also ultimately it's a story about healing and joy, because it kind of opens with me in a very, very, very bad mental place, and meeting the cat that saved my life that day. And then it kind of goes on through until about 2020. And it's kind of going to be like, this was my life in Maine. This is what I experienced. Like, I didn't realize that I was in an abusive relationship with my own brother.
Oh, wow.
And just kind of those realizations and how they have helped me to become the person I am. And also, like, one goal I have is to just sort of help people who may be experiencing similar things feel less alone, because I know one of the biggest struggles I had was feeling like I was alone and that there was no support. Like, there was nobody like me. There was nobody who could understand. And I found out that, spoiler, there were people who understand. And that works better the more you understand yourself. So the memoir is basically like, this is the truth as I saw it. This is what I experienced. And these are the steps that I made to help myself get better. Like, for example, I was on antidepressants for a while, and I was having this sort of repeating cycle where, I'd get depressed, I'd up the dosage or change to a new one, and I would be all like, woohoo! And it went on and on like this. And finally, I talked to my physician and I said, look, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do my job if I can't get my mental health under control. And so I asked for a referral to a psychiatrist. And I got a referral to a psychiatric nurse practitioner, which is just as good. But this was like me saying, I'm not going to put up with this. This does not have to be the story of my life. Like, I do not have to go through, periods of like, suicidal despair and all this other crazy stuff.
Right.
And so it's also a journey about self-advocacy, because a lot of people, even people who don't have mental health issues, have trouble advocating for themselves with their doctors, because I think most people are not sort of trained or raised to believe that it's even an option to advocate for yourself. Or if they do, they do it in a really confrontational way that sours the relationship between the patient and the doctor. And so I'm sharing my stories of like, this is what I did. And if you're in a situation where like you're on psychiatric medications and they're not working and you're still having trouble functioning, you can talk to your provider and say, look, this isn't working. I want to do something else, because like, if I can't function, then I can't take care of my kids or go to, hold a job or, volunteer or do anything else that's really important to you.
I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The time where you met the cat, can you talk about that? Like, how did the cat come into play to technically save your life?
Well, yeah, sure. Basically, there's a little bit of background information. At the time, I was working for a newspaper. So I was working at this newspaper, and I was also being bullied while I was there, which certainly did not improve my mental health at all.
You were bullied at work?
Yeah. It actually happens more than you might think.
Well, that's true. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
It's more like Mean Girl style bullying at work. It's not like physical violence. It's the emotional violence and gaslighting that, is the biggest thing. But one of the people who was solidly in my corner was the editor of that newspaper. And he knew that I liked cats a lot because I had been writing some cat-related freelance content for his paper. And so he said, hey, do you, so he comes up to me and he's like, so I know you like cats. And I said, yeah, I love them. And he said, there's this cat that just went into the local shelter, and his owner had to go to a nursing home. And so the cats ended up in the shelter. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. And I agreed to go meet him at lunchtime. I had actually been planning my own demise, and I was going to do it that day on the way home from work.
Wait. Demise as in unaliving yourself?
Yes.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry. But thankfully you're here. But, oh, my goodness.
Oh, yeah. And it was it was the cat. Like, I met this cat and he was in isolation. He was desperately sick himself with an upper respiratory infection. Mm-hmm. And he looked like he was ready to give up the ghost too. But like, then we hung out during my lunch break, and, he tried to purr even though his nose was just covered with gunk from an upper respiratory infection. And it was kind of like, just as I was about to put him back in his cage because I had to go back to work, he gave me this look that said, I'll live if you will. And I said, okay. Oh, I mean, I couldn't resist a cat in need. But yeah, it was like these two like broken individuals kind of gave each other a reason to live. And it's not like everything instantly got better as soon as I met this cat. I was still severely depressed, but at least I wasn't planning to die. And that kind of was our relationship from then on. Like, he had a knack for knowing when I was kind of in a rough place emotionally, and he would just come up to me and he'd sit on my lap and he'd purr and he'd rub his head on my cheek and stuff like that, like saying, it's okay. And so that is how I met Thomas, and it happened just in the nick of time, as they might say in older days. But I'm definitely so glad I met him. And one of the people that this memoir is going to be dedicated to is the editor of the paper, who maybe not truly knowing that that's what he was doing, but he saved my life too.
Yeah, he did. He saved your life with Tom. It's Thomas, right?
Thomas, yes.
Thomas ended up passing.
He lived until 20, so he was 3 years old when I adopted him, so he was 19.
Wow.
And I mean, he stayed long enough to help me through my mother's own dying process. And of course, this was all going on during the pandemic, and my mother was in Maine, I was in Seattle, and I couldn't get there. And even if I could, I wouldn't have any place to stay. So, that was several really difficult months, but Thomas kept it together. And I mean, my mother didn't, I had hoped that the end of her life would be a lot different. I mean, I was hoping that I would be able to be holding her hand as she slipped off, but instead she passed in a nursing home in Maine because she couldn't take care of herself by that time. But I mean, that's kind of where and that sort of like mid to late 2020 is kind of what I'm seeing as sort of the end of the memoir, because it was the ending of two very important things that year. There was my life with my cat Thomas, and my relationship with my mother. And yeah, I mean, sometimes Mom helped me when I was sad about something with Thomas, and sometimes Thomas just knew how to step up. While my mother was like, 'cause there were days when I'd never know when I was going to get nice mom or mean mom. It just kind of depended on how she was feeling that day. And like some days I'd call and I'd just get this endless thing about like how terrible I am, and like I'm a spendthrift, and I this and that and the other thing. And then there were other times when she'd be like, thank you so much. I know this isn't easy for you. I mean, and I know especially at this time. But so I never knew quite which one I was going to get, because she was in some level of dementia toward the end of her life. But,
I was going to ask, did she have some type of disease or something like Alzheimer's?
Yeah,
or something?
she was in pretty poor health at the end of her life. She had heart valve disease, and she had congestive heart failure. Well, I mean, a bunch of like heart related stuff.
Yeah, I know that all too well. My mother has the same thing, so I know about that.
Yeah, and my mother was never one to trust doctors very much, which is interesting. That like here I am working with all these doctors and finding out how to communicate with doctors in a way that's effective, and being assertive about that I want to be respected, but at the same time being like, this is what's going on with me. These are some things I've read about, and you're the doctor. What do you have to say about this? And,
right.
My mother was more of a like, I'm just not going to do that. So
she was very adamant about not talking to the doctors or working with the doctors.
Yeah, she was definitely more into sort of the holistic cures. And I think it's probably a lot of bad experiences on her end. I mean, she was she used to tell me that she had terrible experiences at the dentist when she was a kid. And this was in the 1940s, and they still had drills that they operated by a foot pedal. So
I can only imagine.
And so, I mean, it's not terribly surprising that my mother didn't do a great job taking care of her own teeth, but she made sure my brothers and me got the dentist all right.
She learned her lesson. She learned her lesson very, very quickly. So with your memoir, what is one thing that you think will be beneficial for anybody that is suffering from any type of mental illness, or suffering from depression, or possibly taking that route to unalive themselves?
Well, there are resources, crisis lines and things like that. But that said, there are a number of communities that, I mean, often they send the police, and that can be a really toxic interaction. I mean, I've seen I've heard stories of like queer, trans, Black people, having mental health crises, and the cops come along and they get killed instead of getting emergency help. And so that's something that I would like to work toward, is just better health equity for everyone, because it's like, we're all human beings, and there's no reason why one human type should be more valid or than another human type. And I mean, I don't know, as a member of the queer community, I at least have some idea of what it's like to be like super duper marginalized, but not, I wouldn't say I know what it's like to be Indigenous in the US. I don't. I mean, there's no way I could, but I could know through my own experience of marginalization and how I feel about it, that can give me compassion for other people's struggles. So it's not, and so I think it's not like my compassion and empathy is based on like, if this, this is not something anybody should have to feel. And I am aware that there are plenty of structural issues that make it really hard for like 90%, I mean, just so many people to even access mental health care. So I guess the advice I would give is, if you are struggling with a mental illness and you can't access therapy, or you don't have insurance or anything like that, there are organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance that give free online support groups for people living with mental illnesses, and also for the families of people living with. I mean, before I had insurance and before I could get my act together, it was support groups, free support groups, whether it was like, a 12-step program or an online workshop or something like that. And I found some help there, because at least there were people in those groups who could understand on some level what I was going through.
Right.
So I would say definitely, like, if you don't have access to healthcare or to counselors, then please take advantage of some of these free groups, but make sure they're good ones. Like, don't go to like Bubba's, depression group. I mean, I would definitely recommend using support groups, from organizations like NAMI or like DBSA or the Trevor Project for LGBTQ plus youth, things like that. So I think, if nothing else, that will help you feel less alone. And you might also be able to get information on coping strategies from people who have experienced similar things.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that information and, the resources. I will be adding the resources to the description box below this video once it's aired. So I appreciate you, giving that information out and sharing it with everyone. And I also appreciate you for coming on and sharing your story. Let us know, like, when your memoir is dropping. When is it dropping, and where can people find you online?
Supposed to be later this year. I don't have an exact date yet, but I will shout it to the hilltops when the memoir is released. But
so where can people follow you or find you online?
Well, I am on TikTok. My handle there is at Janea Kelley, JaneaKelley. I'm on Instagram and Threads as itisI.Janea Kelley. And then I have other, I'm on LinkedIn and stuff like that, but I feel like that's more for the grown up, the like professionals, which is weird, but.
So TikTok and Instagram. So it is I with the letter I, or it is I with E?
It is I, the letter ITISI.Janea Kelley.
Okay, Janea. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. It was lovely to hear, and I thank you for still being here. Thank you to Thomas and the editor for interceding, and keeping you here. That is wonderful to hear, and I'm happy to hear that you're still here and you're working through it. So thank you for coming.
I'm really grateful to be alive. I didn't think I would ever say that, but today I am definitely grateful to be alive.
I am too, because I'm glad the editor and Thomas saved your life. And you have Belladonna now. Belladonna, right?
Belladonna, yep.
And you have Belladonna. That's amazing. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and for watching. If you're listening on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell for more updates. like, comment, share. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Unloaded and Uncovered Podcast. And don't forget to follow us and like the page on Facebook, Unloaded and Uncovered. And I will see you all next week with a brand new episode. Thank you all. And Jana, thank you again for coming.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's been great. And like I said, as soon as the book, when I know about a launch date for the book, I'll let you know about it.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll also put it where I'll blast it across social as well. So thank you.
Cool. Well, all right.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye-bye.